Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. Since the 1800s, tarot cards have been used as a source of spiritual guidance. And unlike what most people believe, tarot does not predict the future. Instead, they tell us stories about our lives and enable us to connect with our inner wisdom and gain a deeper understanding of a situation. It's an additional tool that we can consult to make better and more conscious decisions in our lives. And today, I have the pleasure of speaking with one of the most beloved tarot card artists, Chris-Anne Donnelly. Chris-Anne is a deck creator, artist, and magic maker, as well as a marketing strategist and owner of Pixelbrand, a branding and graphic design company. She has successfully kickstarted 3 independent card decks: the Sacred Creators Oracle, the Seer Tarot, and the Muse Tarot. And she offers unique courses for creators that combine marketing and branding with manifestation and intuition. During our conversation, we'll talk about the creative inspiration behind Chris-Anne's designs. She'll also explain how tarot works and how we can use them to develop insight and overcome blocks so that we can become the best version of ourselves. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to like, rate, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Thanks. Hi, Chris-Anne. It's so nice to have you with us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Thank you for making it. I know that we're here today to talk about your new deck, the Tarot of Curious Creatures, but I have to make an honorable mention of this beauty right here, the Seer Tarot. This is one of my favorite tarot card decks in my collection, but these images are simply so enchanting and I connect so well with these cards. So I just wanted to thank you for creating this gem.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you for I love it when people connect with it. It's just as a creator, that is when we put work out into the world, and all creators I assume are the same. When we hear that people are enjoying our work, it's just kind of like, well, that just makes my heart
really
happy.
gratifying.
That's the reason why we do it, because it is, creating a deck is a lot of work, and it's something that comes from the heart, the soul, we put all of our energy into it. So when we hear that people are enjoying it, it's just, that's everything. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. So anyway, Chris-Anne, as you just mentioned, you put a lot of heart into making these cards, and your designs are really unique in terms of the imagery and the design. So I'm just curious to know, what is your creative process like? How do you gain inspiration for these designs and these images that you use?
It's the inspiration kind of, I'm going to sound like it just kind of happens, it's not something that I actively do stoke creativity, and I'm actively sending messages to the muse and saying, okay, I'm here. Whenever you're ready with a new idea, here's my hands, use my talent, use whatever you want to get a message through. Cause I kind of feel like, it's not always something that comes just from me. Actually, with a lot of the work, I feel like it's kind of external to me, and I'm just a Photoshop by proxy or artist by proxy. I just sort of do the work for something else. Although with Seers, it felt like it was a lot more in my head, and I had a lot more thinking to do with it. But with the Muse Tarot or with the Tarot of Curious Creatures and that sort of thing, it's just sometimes the inspiration just comes, and I have a moment where I get started on a project, and then I kind of have this choice point of, is this going to be a full deck? Is this just going to be a few images? Are we going to jump into a year of production with this? And sometimes they just feel like a massive yes in my system, and I just run with it. So, I wish that I had a better answer for where inspiration comes from. That's something that I will be curious about and researching and wondering about my whole entire life.
Yeah, I hear you. So it's like you're channeling everything that you get, all the inspiration. But I was wondering if you had any specific practices that you use to kind of induce, these creative urges. Is there anything that you do in particular that works for you?
Yes, for sure. So it's, well, number one, it's making space for it to happen. When if I am really busy it doesn't matter, what the other busy thing is, especially, if I'm busy working on something like a client project or client work, or I'm doing art for someone else, or if I'm busy studying, or I'm busy moving, or the inspiration is definitely not going to come on. Like, new amazing ideas don't come in those spaces. So I really make a practice of giving myself a little bit of space and time. And especially at the end of the year, we're coming into December, always every year in December, I give myself the
Really
whole
busy,
month where, but as an artist in December, or as my cycle of work in Decembers, I take Decembers off generally, as far as like, I'm not going to start any new projects. I'm not going to be thinking or planning. And a lot of people plan in December, they're super into planning for the new year.
Yeah, they're getting into, setting resolutions and they're reflecting on what happened in the past year. So yeah,
Absolutely.
Definitely a very busy time mentally for a lot of people.
Yeah. And so what I've done in the last 7 or 8 years now is I'll take Decembers and I stop jotting notes down. I stop writing. I just take a pause and I allow myself to just be in pause. Although, I'm busy doing other things, but it's making conscious space for new ideas and new inspiration to come. Because if we're so full, there's no space for inspiration to land. So I definitely give myself time, as far as like, that's the seasonal time, like 1 month of the year. This is a time for just having an empty cup
Yes.
and allowing whatever happen, and allowing whatever ideas to come in. Then usually by the end of December, I have a ton of new ideas, because I've just not been writing them down. I've not been capturing everything. I've not been trying to remember every little idea that comes into my head. I take the December off for that. And by the end of December, there's always a few things that have popped into my mind, but I haven't written them down, because I don't do any writing in December. And
you don't make notes?
I won't.
Like
No.
Okay.
In December, I won't take notes. I won't be
Wow.
because I'm in capture mode a lot. I'm in like, oh, I've got a million ideas and I'm trying to write it all down, but I could never, there's no way that one person, me and, or even me and my assistant, or me and subcontractors, we couldn't get all of those things done because I have too many ideas. So
I can imagine. Yes.
and so many creatives are the same, it's not like this is something where so many people in general, we've got all of these ideas and we need armies of ourselves to get them all done, And so in December, I don't write it. I am fully in sit with an empty cup mode. I don't write anything down. I don't write here's the 100 things that I could do next year down. I'll usually do it now early in January, but just giving myself that space makes space for new ideas to come,
Yeah. And you say that you have like about 100 ideas. How do you decide which ones you commit to? Because that's a challenge that I face sometimes, with my writing. I have so many ideas about what I want to do on social media and the kind of content that I want to create. How do you decide which one would be the best use of your energies? Like which one you want to commit to?
Well, so for the December project every year, the December pause, the best ideas rise to the top, because we actually don't forget our best ideas. And when I first started doing this, I was so worried, if I don't write it down, I'm going to forget it. And what if that amazing ideas in the stuff I forget? You don't forget the great ones. They don't go away. So for me, it's often there's there's an idea that comes and I'll just like let it sit. But if it sits there for a really long time, then if it sticks, it's okay. This has to happen. This has to happen. It has to be done. Like I need to create this thing. And it also, so there's that piece, but there's also the piece of how excited it makes me, because so many ideas can make us excited in the beginning, but then once we actually start to do them, I'll do, if it's a deck idea, let's say, I'll do one image. And by that time that image is finished, okay, the idea is already starting to fizzle. I'm not as excited about it anymore. Okay, well, that's not something, that's not that energy is not going to sustain me for 78 cards or 78 pieces of art plus the guidebook, right?
Yes.
So it's really, I give myself permission to change my mind. And a lot of people that, I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs that don't give themselves permission to change their mind. Like once they start, they have to finish. And that's not me. I will give myself full permission.
That was me in the past, for sure.
Yeah. And that's hard. That is such a hard place to be, because you started out and with all of this energy, and then you're 25% through something, or even if you just started, just the simple fact of starting, you're going to finish. And that for me just isn't the, so yes, I give myself permission to stop, and that can be dangerous if I was stopping everything, but that's not who I am. I'm more naturally inclined to finish everything. So I have to give myself permission to stop.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's so nuanced though. You have to understand, like you have to really be connected to yourself to know when to cut your losses on a certain project that you started, So I think it's also using data and really like seeing what's working and what's not working. That's how I measure, how far I've come. So,
yeah. I mean, if we are jumping into a lot of different things, and I always sort of look at it from an energetic perspective, and if I've even started something and all I've done is the business plan of something, and I've put some energy into it, and I've taken the first few steps, and then it sits there on my desk for a year, and then there's another project that I just have the first inclinations of and first little pieces of art. Maybe I've talked to my publisher about it, or maybe I've talked to a few people about it, or gathered a few connections, hired a few people, whatever it is. Every single one of those things that's sitting on my desk that's sort of a start that hasn't been finished, I see it as that's energy that I've put into it. It's like these loose ends. So I'll start something and I'll put some energy into it, and start something else and put energy into it. And I can get myself really easily into a place where I have so much energy kind of stagnating in half-finished projects that sometimes and then I'm drained, because somewhere in the back of my mind, there's this voice that's like, well, you didn't finish this, you didn't finish that. Right? So that's so draining. It's exhausting.
It is very draining. Yes.
Right? So then sometimes it's just a matter of going through, taking a look at the year and saying, well, I started this thing. Well, am I going to finish it or not? So sometimes the follow through isn't finishing it. Sometimes the follow through is simply stating, I'm not doing that project, or that project is officially on pause and maybe will never be resurrected. And then speaking that to life, letting anyone that was potentially a part of that, it's just like following through and reclaiming that energy. So then I'll have all of this other energy for one project that I really do want to do.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That's great advice, Chrisanne. And one of your projects that saw the light of day is the Tarot of Curious Creatures. And I absolutely love it. You use some really quirky, colorful characters with a combination of human bodies and animal heads, which I thought was very interesting. So tell us your thought process behind the unique spin on these cards.
That deck, I started that deck in over the holidays of 2019, and we had our two teenage nephews from Chile visiting. So we had teenage boys in the house for a month. They came to snowboard. So, it was such a fun energy in the house, and silly, and they're teenagers. And so, all we're doing is we're going snowboarding and snowshoeing and taking them to do axe throwing. Like, what do you do with teenage boys in the house, right? So we're just we just had so much fun. And I had finished, Lightseers had just launched with Hay House. And so I wasn't working on any projects actively. And one night that my husband they were all playing PlayStation, and I was in the living room, and I just had my laptop, and I was really not interested in the game that they were playing. And so I just started fooling around with images, and the first image for that deck just sort of happened out of me playing. It was the Justice card. I really love parrots, and I found this beautiful image of an African gray, and then I started playing around with some of the bodies that I had considered using for the Muse Tarot, but didn't use. And so that particular card actually has kind of a desert background. She's standing on sand, which is very much the feeling of the imagery from the Muse Tarot. And that's because I had just kind of finished the Light Seers and finished the Muse, and I was sitting with some of these extra images. And so I put this African gray head on the body, and one of my nephews looked over and started laughing and kind of like, what is my aunt doing? And
she's weird.
And it was just, yeah, it was just fun. Like we laughed about it. And so then I just kind of sat with how easily that image came and how the Justice card worked so well. And I started playing with what would happen if I were to take this through and make a deck. And I chatted with my assistant about it, and I said, okay, let's play with this for a week and see what happens. Let's work on it for a week and see how far we get. Often I'll do that where I'm like, okay, we'll invest a week of time and just see if it flourishes. And after the week, we were exchanging images back and forth, and we laughed so much that week, because you can imagine when you're trying to fit animal heads to human bodies.
Curious to know, how did you choose which animal to use for which card? Because some of them are obvious, like for the Hangman, you used the bat, and for the Lovers, you chose lovebirds. But there were some of them that I wasn't sure why you used that specific animal for
Absolutely.
that tarot.
Yeah. So some of them are because when you're working with different images, trying to get the angles right from an animal and a human, sometimes we were limited, kind of like which bodies would work with which heads, and then which archetype does this feel like.
Yeah.
But mostly, mostly it had to do with us kind of looking at what animal could represent the feelings of the archetype, and we were kind of, as I was saying, we were just laughing so much because we were finding all of these animal heads and trying to find expressions, because most animals, they don't have expressions. So you're trying to like look at a picture and say, what could I do to this to make it more expressive? And so we're playing with like opening the eyes or opening the mouth or tilting the head, or what can we do to make these animals be more human?
That's so cool.
Like playing with that.
Yeah.
And then when we found the right expression on the animal, we didn't always line up our understanding of the animals or what they mean. But sometimes we did, like the lovebirds, like you said, where there's a sloth for the Four of Swords, which is like a time to slow down.
Oh yeah, the sloth. Yes.
Right. So some of them are very obvious, but some of them were just about the expression of the animal, and the animal's expression was, this looks like it's surprised when we do, or this looks like it's worried. And so it was more about what human expressions the animals could come up with. And then sometimes it had much more to do with the archetype. There wasn't one rule. I think about the Magician card, and that's a polar bear. And with the Magician, we were thinking, okay, this polar bear just kind of felt like kind of somewhat magnificent and
see, I would have thought
magical.
You'd use a rabbit, because rabbit out of the hat. So
yep, absolutely. Yep, that would make sense too. For us, when some of the images came to life, the animals had something to say about it. It wasn't just our thinking, because you're working with these images, and as I'm working with them, often I'm starting to get their messages, or I'm starting to get some of what the archetype wants to say. And so in the case of the Magician, I didn't expect this at all, because we laughed so much in the first the first month of creating the deck. It was pure laughter, pure joy. We just laughed at all of how silly and crazy and ridiculous these heads looked on human bodies. But then when we started getting into, okay, let's look at what animals go where, some of them started to have their own messages. Like with the Magician, as the polar bear, you're working with animals, and the polar bear became the Magician because, we started to think about, well, not only what does this mean from the human archetype, but what does the animal want to say? And so with the polar bear, the polar bear wanted to talk about global warming. The polar bear wanted to talk about its habitat being destroyed. And so you start to think about, well, how does that then become part of your deck? And the reason that the polar bear became the magician was because I think it's somewhat magical that these giant animals can live on ice that's melting, and somehow they make it all the way to land and then back to the ice. And they're sort of in this state of like flux where they don't know what their home is going to look like from one year to the next because it's being reduced so much. And somehow there are these big, heavy, giant creatures that still are managing to survive.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So there's like a really deep meaning behind that. That's so interesting.
Some of the animals just had, it's not the same with all of them, but some of them just had something to say. Yeah.
I was curious to know, were you inspired by the characters from Greek mythology, ancient Greek mythology, like centaurs and even hieroglyphics in ancient Egypt? They definitely had a couple of characters which also had an animal head and human body, like Thought. I hope I'm saying it right, Thought. Yes. And, the jaguar god. And were you inspired by any of these characters?
In some ways and in some cards for sure. And it wasn't something that I kind of set out to do.
Yeah.
But around that same time when I started creating the deck in December of so it was just prior to December 2019 and just prior to the world having such a devastating change, right? We're just prior to pandemic time. I had this dream that was really, those dreams that you wake up from and they've just like changed your world because they were so incredibly powerful, emotional. And this dream did have, and I'm not going to say the name right. I don't know how to pronounce it properly. It's Sekhmet. It's one of the Egyptian goddesses.
Sekhmet. Yeah. I think it's the falcon head.
The lion head and so this
I'm mixing up my gods, my Egyptian gods. But okay, Sekhmet.
Yes. And I didn't know the name at the time because I just got the image of this lioness goddess who was really just like angry and blazing fire and like kind of just it was fully, I must have read about it at some point. I must have heard about it, but I didn't have that. That knowledge wasn't, I didn't have access to that knowledge, because I had the dream and, this fiery goddess raging anger down on humanity and had this moon kind of over the head. And so I'm sure that did have something to do with it because that dream happened and my nephews were there and, just sort of, so I'm sure that there was some inspiration there, but it wasn't something that I did necessarily consciously until I got to my Queen of Wands in the deck, and she showed up there because the Queen of Wands is the lioness, the
lioness. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So she is, so that dream definitely did show up in the deck.
Wonderful. I don't have the deck yet, but I will order it soon. For those who don't know much about tarot, could you briefly explain how it works and what goes into a reading?
For sure. So, there's so many different ways to read tarot. So I can only speak to kind of the way I use the deck, or I would use tarot decks. But really with tarot or oracle decks, it's sort of it's a way that we can just get access to our unconscious minds, to our inner knowing. And sometimes they're the greatest permission givers because we maybe want something that we're not allowing ourselves to want, or we're not allowing that awareness to go from our unconscious mind to our conscious mind. So decks are great ways to kind of just connect with inner voice or higher self, source, spirit, God, whatever you believe. And so for me, I will always just have I say a question, but really it's more like a curiosity. Because if I say question and you're going to go to a deck and ask a question, the first thing most people will do is they will say, okay, is X thing going to happen? And they ask kind of that yes or no question.
Yes or no, yeah.
Right? And yes or no is just such a you know, it's like you get a card and it's over. It's not really the way I see tarot working. I see tarot and oracle decks as being more of a gateway to potential or gateway to possibilities. So I'll more ask, and let's say I want to know, you know, am I going to get this job? Instead of saying, am I going to get the job? My curiosity will be, what do I need to know about this job? So that it, you know, or about this job that I'm curious about. What do I need to know so that it happens, or so that whatever's meant to happen for my highest good, or that so that the best outcome will come, you know? So that's when I will ask the question. I hold that in my mind for, you know, a few minutes. Sometimes I meditate on it depending on how much time I have, shuffle the deck, pull a card, and then the cards, whatever cards you pull, those cards are going to give us an in-depth understanding of some of the potential outcomes depending on how we act and the things that we do. So it's, I mean, they're fantastic guidance systems just for life,
Right.
for, you know, for getting to know ourselves as well.
Right, right. And have you ever faced this issue where you're so attached to a certain outcome and then you kind of project what you want onto the cards? Because that has happened to me sometimes, and that's happened for my friends. So how do you overcome that obstacle?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard, right? When we become so knowledgeable of what we want and knowledgeable of the cards at the same time, and we kind of know the pluses and the minuses of each card, sometimes that can be a real issue. And that's why they say, you know, readers have it's so much easier for us to read for other people than it is for us to read for ourselves.
Yeah.
But when you're using tarot as kind of an inner guidance system, it's almost like this inner getting to know myself, using tarot in this kind of more psychological way, like what am I thinking, what am I desiring, what are the potentials right now? Well, then oftentimes tarot, where we think that, you know, just as you said, you feel like you are projecting onto the cards. Well, what are you projecting? Like, you're projecting your innermost desires and needs and the things that you know that should be in your life, or the things that you know, or the people you know maybe you should let go of, or whatever it is that you're asking about, right? So when we project those things onto the cards, well, that's like full validation for what's actually going on in the inner landscape. If you are using the cards predictively, that's a whole other thing, right? So if you want, so then I don't know if it's that's almost like we just become so in tune with our own inner desires that we're projecting onto the cards. And it's almost a place where, well, did you need the cards for this in the first place? You probably just needed to journal.
Yeah, that's true. And I think sometimes people are just looking for assurance that, oh, yeah, there's a chance that it can happen, you know, and that's when I think it can get a little bit toxic. It can go on the dark side if you know.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and if you're doing something that's a little more, so if you're wanting a more predictive reading for myself, if I'm wanting to know, you know, direct predictive information, then in that particular scenario, and I don't often use the cards this way, but if I really need something that's like, I need to know and it needs to be predictive, then I'll grab a deck that I'm not very used to. I'll grab a deck that I don't normally use, because that's going to give me more intuitive information, and it's going to be more intuitive than it is going to be like a knowing of the meaning of the cards, or a knowing of how I can possibly spin this card so that it fits my scenario that I want it to, you know.
And how do you know which deck would give you that feeling, that sense of not being too tied to the cards and just really looking at the intuitive information it gives you?
Right, as far as choosing a deck like that. So I will usually go, so the cards that I use for those kinds of readings, I mean, I'll never use my own decks because I know them too well, and I know all of the meanings, and I know all the different ways you could read each card. So I'll go to a deck that I don't use very often. I may even buy a new deck in that moment, you know, if I want something that's totally different. And it tends to be different than the cards that I'm comfortable with. So if I love cards that kind of have a certain vibe or feeling, then my more shadowy decks are the ones that are really going to call me out, or really going to give me information that maybe I don't want to see. They feel completely different, and maybe I'm not comfortable with them, and maybe I don't even particularly like them, which is an interesting way to see tarot. But I do have a few decks like that I just pull out for moments when I need a different sort of answer, you know.
Interesting.
They're totally different. They're, they tend to be, for me, they tend to be pretty, not negative, pretty
Dark.
They're just darker looking decks. They're just darker a little looking, more, just not what I would normally find myself being attracted to. So I do have a few decks like that, and they're fantastic, wonderful decks, and they're perfect for me for my shadow stuff. But I also have a shadowy kind of deck that's very like childish and playful, and because sometimes I know that
I think I know which one you're talking about.
I have a few, I have a couple of different decks for different things. And I think as we advance as readers and we get to know ourselves as readers, then you're going to know, wow, this deck is totally different, but I'm attracted to it for some reason. Give it a go.
Just go with a go. Yeah. And you say that tarot can really help us in our goals and overcoming challenges. Like, what are some of the readings or the styles that we should probably start with? Because I'm guessing a lot of people listening to this may be beginners in tarot. So what do you suggest for them to get started and with using the cards and trying to help them with their goal setting?
For goals, so there are. I mean, I have a free. I will give you the link. I've got a free downloadable that's sort of like, well, mine is specific for business, card spreads for business, and it's like a 20-page PDF, and there's businessy kind of spreads. But if it's not just business, if it's, let's say it's a relationship goal, then I would say start with number one. You want to start with a spread rather than pulling cards randomly. So you can go online, Google like relationship spreads, and start with maybe something that's 3 cards. I think, or 2 cards. I think some of the larger spreads for beginners can just become so overwhelming, like the 12 card spreads and
like the whole, no, those are too advanced.
It just gets into a lot of conflicting information if you're just getting started, right? Like it's just like you could get, it's just too much to read up on and to understand to really. It's great practice, but as far as just getting information quickly, I would say look for like a 2 to 3 card spread, something that's specific to the topic that you're looking at understanding. And if it's goal setting, what I love to do with cards when I'm goal setting is I play with the cards in a lot of different ways that are quite creative, I would say, or unusual. Compared to just the standard 3 card spread. I'll even do stuff like with goals. I'll pick a card that I'll look for a card that represents my goal, and I'll just go through the deck and I'll choose this card represents my goal. Okay, there it is. And then I'll choose another card that I feel like for me today, this represents how I feel or where I'm at in that goal. So you have these 2 cards that you've selected. There's my goal. That's the card number, let's call it card number 3, and where I'm at, card number 1. And then I'll shuffle and I'll pull a random card. And that random card is kind of the middle card, the one that goes in the middle. And so then that card I'll read as, this is the card that is sort of the path between where I'm at and where I want to be. And then, so just kind of playing with that goal setting, what do I need to know today? What's in the middle? What moves me from where I am to where I want to be? I mean, that would be one spread that comes to mind, something that your listeners could give, could play with and try. But there's you can use tarot for goal setting in a million different ways.
In different ways, I know. But you say to start, they would do best with like a simple 3 card spread or maybe a Celtic cross even, right?
Yep, and that one gets a little more complicated. They could do a Celtic cross, but they could definitely, goals, you could even, if you know what your goal is and you have an active goal in mind, you could even use it in a very strategic, almost businessy kind of way, or in a like a strategic mindset. You could just have pull a card for 3 days, 3 months, or 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, let's say. So like, what do I something that I can look at as a message, something that I need to know for the next 3 weeks, what I need to know for the next 3 months, what do I need to know for the next 3 years for this particular goal. And no matter what card you pull, your intuition is going to put those pieces into place. What does it have to do with the goal? And this is often the difficulty when people are starting to read.
Mm-hmm.
They may pull a card that's more about love, and they try.
Yeah, they get confused. Like if you get the 2 of Cups, what you're asking about.
Exactly. So the Two of Cups is, for your listeners, usually has two people, and they're, sometimes it looks like they're maybe getting married, or they're in some
Yes.
sort of ceremony together, and it's often a love card. But then if that shows up, that card for a business reading, 3 months out, and I get the Two of Cups, well, how can I connect that to business? But this is where your intuition, you just allow your intuition to put things together. So no matter what your goal is, and I'm going to say that it's, something to do with business, it's writing. Let's say it has to do with writing.
Writing a new book.
There you go, writing a new book. Then 3 months out, maybe you need to be thinking about, okay, there's relationships that are really important here. And could be characters. It could have to do with your characters in the book, or it could just have to do with that connection to 3 months out. I should start to connect with future readers, even though the book's not done. And I should start to, have this relationship with them. And how can I push that along? And, your brain is going to start to make connections depending on your question and depending on the card, but you just allow those connections to be made. My number one advice for new readers is to not say, I'm making it up. Or if you do say, feels like I'm making it up, then say, yeah, I probably am. And that's exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right. And it's really about looking at the symbolism of the card more than the actual literal meaning. Because I think when I first started reading tarot, I got really hung up on everything that I read in the guidebooks. Like I would follow the direct interpretation from the guidebooks, and that would throw me off. And I think initially you do need that as a crutch. And as you get better, you can kind of interpret it on your own, and, just go, let your intuition flow and see what stands out to you. For me, it's like the imagery of the cards is really important. That's why I don't like tarot decks that are very plain. And that's one of the reasons why I love your decks, because the imagery is so vivid and the colors. And for me, that's what really speaks to me. So,
yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely. I have a design background, so color is my, color is one of my love languages.
Oh,
I definitely love.
Yeah, I can definitely see color.
That. But I agree. I think a lot of people get really, we need the guidebooks when we begin,
right?
But we also, it's a really good practice to kind of look at the images before you jump into the guidebook. Look at the images and see what comes up for you. What does the card remind me of? What sensations do I maybe feel? Do I have an emotional reaction to this card, and what is it? Does it remind me of anyone, or a time, or a place, or something that's happened in my life? Because if it reminds you of another situation, there's maybe a reason why. What did you learn from that situation that you can bring in? So I will, I like to offer that suggestion to new readers, that before you go to the guidebook, you allow that intuitive mind to do a little bit of work. I'm going to sit with this card for 2 minutes. And sometimes that 2 minutes feels like a really long time, because you just want to go to the guidebook to get the answer. But sit with it. Just, sit with it, write down a couple of key words, couple of key sensations, then go to the guidebook, and then connect the guidebook to your key sensations, and you're going to have a fantastic message.
Yeah. And I think also don't get too hung up on the actual names of the cards, like, for instance, death or the tower, Oh,
absolutely.
That used to throw me off sometimes. And even now, if I see the Three of Swords, which is like one of the most painful cards to get in the deck, when I see that, I'm like, oh, why has that come up? So it's like getting past that reaction that you might feel because of, the card, the imagery, the name, or whatever. So
absolutely. I don't mind at all seeing the death card, because for me, it's so much about letting older things go to make space for rebirth. But I don't like to see the Three of Swords cup, or the Three of Swords card come either. Just one of those things where, but there's always a reason why it comes when it does. And it's not always because something's going to happen in the future. Often it's something that I'm carrying in the present. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you say that one of the best ways to kind of understand the archetypes on these cards is to actually feel the cards and make some notes. Is there anything else that you'd suggest people to familiarize with themselves with all these cards and their meanings?
Oh, it is time and it is practice, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there is a newer trend in tarot where it's people are reading 100% intuitively. And I think intuitive reading is fantastic. But I also think it's really a good practice to, if you're going to look at, especially if you're going to look at reading for others, if it's purely for you, then, then go with your intuition. That's fantastic. But if you want to branch out and start reading for others, I think it's a really good practice to start to, put the time in and the energy to get to know the cards, because it does, as humans, as people, we tend to be, we tend to stick to the things that are more comfortable for us, or the things that we know the best. So someone that is always has beautiful luck and energy and relationships and love, let's say, right? Then they're going to see the positive side of love in almost all of those cards. But if you're reading for other people, maybe that other person is not going to necessarily resonate with your experience. They probably won't. So it's a really good practice to actually spend the time and just do a little bit of study and get to know the full human experience that is embedded in those 78 cards, because it's amazing that 78 cards can do this, but they absolutely contain the whole of the human emotional experience, the whole of the human story, and in the human condition can be contained within those 78 cards. So when you learn the traditional meanings of the cards, then you're able to read for so many other people, because
Yeah.
everyone's story is so different. So and then it's such a beautiful, I think tarot is such a beautiful craft in that way. If I'm reading for other people, and I don't do a ton of readings for other people.
Yeah,
right
that's
now,
going to ask
but
you, do you do readings?
I do, but I do them more in the context of business or goal setting or creating something. That's kind of
Okay.
my favorite way to read, you
Okay.
know. Um, Yeah, I have done readings in the past, and I actually don't love to do love readings, and that tends to be if you're if
Those
you're a
are
tarot
tricky.
reader,
Those are
yeah.
tricky for sure.
and
Yeah.
and most of the
But they
readings
seem to
that,
be very popular, like on YouTube. On YouTube, there are a ton of tarot readers. A lot of
yes.
them are very talented, but there's some of them not so much. But I actually learned a lot watching them do readings, because each of them has their own style, their own brand, and I tend to connect with certain kind of reader, and the others put me off, and so it's really strange how you can resonate with different styles. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's yeah.
Well, and there's not one style for everyone, right? Like my style would definitely not resonate with some people, and does resonate with other people. And but I will, when I have done readings where people would come and they'd ask for a love reading, and I find those sorts of readers that do the full gamut of readings. They're just readers 24/7. That's their full-time job. I have so much respect for them, because you end up it's so draining emotionally. And I
Oh,
find,
it
like, with
is.
love readings,
Yeah.
so many
Yeah.
people will come for a love reading because they want to be validated for what they already want, right?
Exactly.
So they love you if you give them their validation. But if the
Yeah.
cards don't show that, then they think you're, I don't like that reader. It's a horrible reader, horrible reading, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's what they needed to hear.
Yeah.
And
And that's why you have to be cautious about some of the readers on YouTube, because some of them tell you what you want to hear, and it's very clickbaity.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That is I think that's part of the intuitive tarot trend. Part of it
Yeah.
is so beautiful and so wonderful, and it is changing the way that tarot is being read, and it's sort of, that's great if that's the new, things change, and that's fantastic. But at the same time, that craft, that art of being able to hold space for someone who is very vulnerable, or who is in deep pain, or who is experiencing, something that's truly emotionally devastating, and they want some advice, you want to be able to guide people through those moments without just giving them all the positive, and that is a very special skill. Yeah, there's a lot of emotional intelligence that's required. Like, fantastic readers have a really high EQ.
Well, the good ones do.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I love that you say that. You got to be responsible when you're doing a reading for someone, because some of them are, they wear their heart on their sleeves, and they're looking to you for guidance and for some answers. And there are a lot of people out there who are very vulnerable. And do you worry about that there are some readers who kind of give metaphysical, these tools like tarot, oracle, a bad name?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And this is, I think, something that, tarot and our whole industry, whether it's tarot or astrology, anything that is sort
Yes.
of anything that you could find on the shelves in the metaphysical shop right now has kind of experienced this huge growth and popularity in the last 3 years, I would say,
Yeah,
last 5 years,
new
but
age movement.
right, just totally blown up.
Oh yeah.
And with that comes a lot of new readers and a lot of new clients, and there's this beautiful side of it for sure, but then there's also that side of more people jumping into it without maybe having had the same 10 years or 20 years or however, or 5 years even of practice, and so with that there can be people that get a little bit misled, or people that are disappointed. And so if you have someone who is disappointed in their first reading, will they ever go back for another one? Maybe they won't.
They won't. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is so that happens, but I think that happens across all industries. And
That's true.
Yeah. And it is something that that in a shifting, evolving not only popularity, but in a shifting, evolving kind of the awareness of just the collective right now, as the human species is changing so quickly and evolving so quickly. So I think we're just in a space of things are changing right now. And I do trust that they're changing for the better, so that this kind of all this new explosion of readers and everything is, I'm excited by it, because I'm kind of curious to see where it will go.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you collect crystals? Are you into crystals and things like that?
I'm like, I've got one right here. No, I do have some crystals, but to be honest with you, as far as like, I'm much more into rocks and sticks. I'm much more of a I find it outside on my own kind of person. And my husband works in geology, so I have. So he'll go into the field and come back with crystals that he's found. He just came back from Alaska and
straight
brought
from
me
the earth.
Quartz from Alaska. So I was like, okay, those are the crystals that I really, if I find them, or if my husband's found them, he brought me a rock from I think it was 4 kilometers under the, into the core. I was like, okay, this rock is really, so. I mean, I like crystals, but I'm not a fanatic.
You wouldn't call yourself a collector.
No, I've got a good collection, but just because I think over time they've just sort of accumulated, or they've been gifted, or if I'm not, but I do. I mean, they're beautiful, and but I'm more of a rock person.
More of a rock person. Okay. All right, Chris Ann, it's been so wonderful talking to you. I just want to thank you again for giving all these wonderful tools to us that light the path for us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Absolutely. I just want to quickly mention, for those who are interested in learning more about Chris Ann's new deck, the Tarot of Curious Creatures, and her other decks, you can visit chris-ann.com. The link will be in the description box. Chris Ann, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.